My dad was born in Entiat. Actually, he was born in Belton, Wisconsin, and his folks brought him to Wenatchee first, and then shortly thereafter, they moved up to the Entiat and had an orchard and started farming.
About what year was that?
That was the early 1900s when they came to Entiat, and they built the house that Ray Sandridge currently lives in there at the 4 Mile Marker across the bridge. And he built a lot of houses in Wenatchee also. And if you look at the structure of that old house, and then you look around Wenatchee, you'll find some other houses that are built the same way. And I wonder if some of those houses were ones that he built.
So, could be.
So that's one way that your family made a living over the years?
Yeah, primarily in the orchard. Dad was always farming, and his dad saw that all the kids had farms or someplace to live before he died, and the whole family farmed, really.
How about Mom?
Oh, my mom came to Entiat from Wilson Creek. She was a teacher when she got here, and somehow or another they had one of the social get-togethers, and my mom ran into my dad and fell in love with him because he played the accordion. And we still have that accordion. It's one of those little tiny boxes with buttons on both sides, you know. And I heard him play it a couple of times, but I don't think he hardly ever played it after she married him. And consequently, I learned to play the accordion, and I still kind of do. But
Well, music was important because that was part of your entertainment.
oh yeah,
Back when they were.
absolutely.
Yeah.
You didn't have TVs or computers or things like that when you were younger.
And where did you work?
Oh,
Besides the orchard.
well, as I grew up in 1964, I graduated from Entiat High School, went to Seattle Pacific College, and got a couple degrees, one in business administration, one in business education. I taught for a year. I ended up coming back here in 1971 after I married Cheryl over there in Seattle. And in 1971, I started farming. I bought the orchard from my folks, and they moved away to Wenatchee. In 1991, I ran for assessor and worked as the county assessor's elected position for 20 years. I just retired in 2010, January 1st. I didn't run again. I had 5 terms there, 4-year terms. And now I'm back to the same place I lived before, and enjoying it.
Who were your neighbors?
Oh, that's interesting, because one of the things that you brought up here was Abby Jones. T.I. Jones was his brother, and he actually lives where the church parsonage is now today. T.I. and Bertha Jones and their son Paul and Evan. I think Paul has passed away now, but Evan may still be alive, I don't know. Wealth of knowledge there, if you can find him. They used to always have a garden there, a very old one. I knew them. Both of them passed away when they were there. Actually, T.I. went out to mail a letter and started to come back, didn't see a car, and the car ran over and killed him. In about 1959, I think that was when he was passed away.
Did you have any other neighbors besides the Jones?
Well, my uncle lived across the river, across the bridge where my grandfather lived. He bought that place from them, and that was Clifford Griffith. And there was a number of brothers and sisters around this area. They pretty much stayed there. There was Warren, who is Carl's dad. He farmed down in the mouth of the river down here. And Clifford, who farmed where the old homestead was, where Ray Sandridge currently lives. There was my dad, Gilbert, and Ellen. They farmed where we live now. Pete and Melissa Cummel. Melissa was a sister, and they had a farm up there by Roaring Creek. Valletta lived in Chelan, and Marcella lived about 1.5 miles, 2 miles up on a place down there, and was married to Al Rochester. Her name is Marcella Rochester now, and they lost one little kid when they were growing up in the ditch. There's a huge ditch that goes through their place, almost under the corner of their house, and one little boy drowned. I don't remember what the boy's name was. So.
In that era, what did people do for entertainment in the community? What do you kind of remember as a kid?
Well, I remember basketball games. Everybody followed basketball games, and my sister graduated in 1956. Her name was Virginia Kinsley. They live on Silverdale now. She had really bad asthma and had to move away from this area because there was no way that she could live here. I can remember her growing up in her bedroom and us taking her clothes off or something before we ever got in the house because she just couldn't stand ragweed. And Mom and Dad actually moved to Spokane for a year and rented the orchard to J.K. MacArthur, who was one of the famous Entiatites. When he quit farming up here, he had 750 acres and sold it to Namas Fruit Company. Very, very, very successful, wonderful guy. And almost all the kids that we grew up with never changed. We started 12 years of everybody in the same class, and pretty much there was no migratory people here. Even the people that worked for other people stayed here all the time. It was a wonderful community. We had a really close-knit community, and that's why basketball games were so important. There was other football games and things like that. When we got ready to build the track and put in football lights and stuff like that, the community came together, and some of the people like Zweig's with heavy equipment built the track. Free donation from everybody. You know, it was a wonderful facility and especially to know that the community came together and did that.
Besides,
back in that era, you know,
Yep.
Entiat had good basketball teams, and the state basketball tournaments were a big deal. Were you one of those that?
No, that was really before my time, but my sister was graduated in 56 and I was in 64, so she was 8 years in front of me. Mm-hmm. But people like Al Shannon were on those winning teams, and that I can remember going in 1955. My dad bought a new Packard, mm-hmm. and we went to the basketball game. We picked it up the day before we left, and we got home to Entiat and back to Cashmere, and the oil light came on, and the oil light came on, and it had already run through a quart of oil, and Dad called up the dealer and said, I want my money back. I'm bringing it back when I come back. And they said, well, just put oil in it, go to Tacoma and come back with it. Well, it burned a couple more quarts, and it never burned another quart. He loved the car. He kept it for the next, till 1960. So, and it used to be, everyone in the valley, the man worked, and the wife was always at home pretty much. You know, the second person, there was no people that really had to hold a separate second job. We had a small farm, 20 acres, and in those 20 acres, Dad put us all three through college. Mom never worked a lick that I know of. He completely froze out one year, about 1958. And
I'll bet your mom did too work.
Oh, well, she worked as a housewife and all that, yes. But she never worked outside the home, okay, that's what my point was. And they always had enough money to buy a new car every 2 or 4 years, 5 years or something like that. And it's completely changed. Now it's different.
Yeah. What kind of organizations were there for people to join besides going to basketball games?
Well, there was 2 churches, the Federated Church, the Entiat Friends Church. Those were the 2 dominant churches. There was a couple little fellowships that went on outside that church, and there was one at Ardenbohr that always kind of held together. when I was growing up. There was the Lodge, IOF, the Grange Hall. The Grange Hall was built new and it houses the post office today, but the Grange Hall before that was down in Entiat. It was on the east side of the street, and I remember I lost my Bible. The French church was right up the street, and I lost my Bible for a long time. It was gone for like 3 or 4 months and didn't know where it was. And then all of a sudden, somebody found it on the steps behind, there was benches behind the Grange Hall where all the transient winos helped out. And that's where they found my Bible. So the Lodge Hall was different. It was a kitty corner across the street, if I remember right. And it was well, let's see. The Lodge Hall, I had that wrong. The Lodge Hall was on the east side of the street. The Grange Hall was in the upstairs of the pool hall, and the barber shop that was in the bottom. It was a huge cement building.
What kinds of events or hardships do you remember?
Well, I remember 1958 when we totally froze out. That was the only year that my dad had to work out of the, he worked down there at the warehouse 1 whole year to pay the bills. And there was no apples. One person picked every apple on our place, every apple, and out on 20 acres. So it had really frozen out big time. So most of the years we always had apples. We had 15 acres, oh no, see, 18 acres of apples and 2 acres of pears.
You didn't ever get affected by floods?
We were away from the floods. In 48 there was a terrible flood that just went on and on and on, but other people will talk about that.
How about snow and deer?
Oh dear, that was one of the things I put on my list to talk about. In 1958, I think 1958 was the year that the deer fences came in. 1957, I think it was, I'm not positive of the year. My Uncle Warren, down at the mouth of the river, Carl and Phyllis's father, or Carl's father, had been writing to the game department about the deer problem in his orchard. And finally, and there was hordes of deer back then. Finally, he got a letter from the game department that said, if you have a doe that's bothering you, go ahead and shoot it. And so that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And he went up and shot at least, or in the neighborhood of 160 deer in his orchard, and called them up and said, come get them. And that's when they arrested him, and they had a big trial down in the courthouse. And when the people came when the judge came to get in his chambers, the whole courthouse as it is today down there was full of farmers saying, we got trouble with deer. And he couldn't get to his chambers. So he canceled the trial for that day and had it in the Liberty Theater, which was the biggest meeting place, any place in town, the next day. And the people filled the theater out into the street. And they found him not guilty. And that was the start of the deer fence around. And I think in 1958, we built that fence around our orchard. It was on the back side. We didn't go clear around and surround the whole orchard, but there were still lots of deer. And Dad and I would go and drive the deer out. And one night, Dad was walking along the hill and I was walking along the edge of the place, and we were just herding these deer out. Well, we'd made the fence clear out around across from Nomis's warehouse there, as far as we could make it stand up on the rocks. I mean, we couldn't stand up on the rocks out there. You know, it was that far out. And I sat there where I could see the deer going out one at a time around the end of and it was getting dark, and I counted 425 deer that went out around one at a time out of our orchard, you know. So we had a huge problem with deer back then. So that was one of the interesting critters that went by.
You said your mother stayed at home, so how did the family put food on the table? Did you do a lot of preserving, canning?
Well, Mom always canned stuff. We always had plenty of money, except 1958. That was kind of a tough year to go through because we didn't have a whole lot of money at that point. But we survived, and Dad had other investments and made things work. But I can always remember canning apricots, pears. We didn't do apples, you know. We had a big garden usually, so.
Describe the old town of Entiat that you remember when you were young.
It came around the corner. I don't really remember the old bridge that's right below Numero Mountain, but I'll start down there. I remember them building that bridge, and it was unique to all other bridges in the area, or period, because it was not only curved like this, because they made the curve out in the river so that it would meet the mountain and be easier to go southbound there. But it was also the first bridge that ever had concrete, had cardboard tubes or something inside it that it wasn't completely full of concrete. They actually built it differently. It was new technology, and that bridge is still there. They didn't knock it out. It's underneath the water someplace, you know. And then something else that, as a sideline of the whole thing, is that when they were building the new bridge that's there today, they were pouring and pouring and pouring. It was on this side of the river, if I remember right, that they were working on. And they finished the pour on Saturday afternoon, and they walked away from the pour, and the whole thing fell in. Every last lick of it. And it was a huge mess. Anyway, you come around the corner by Numero Mountain there and start up the straight stretch, and the main river valley road turned off right there and went up the canyon down at the bottom of it. And you can still see the old road coming out up there at the kiosk. Then there's a little kind of a gas station there. There used to be more development there, but it was down to where there wasn't much there. If you went up about halfway to town, there was a service station on the left. Before you got to the service station on the main road, if you turned left to go up to the school, there was a main drag that came right off of, is it Shearson Street, or what is it right there by the school? I can't remember. But it's a little tiny short street between the highway and the school.
Yeah.
That used to have a road that went right straight down and went by the Federated Church, and there was houses on either side. And that Federated Church set, a little bit north of where and a little bit east of where the pumping station is, right in there, that area. Then as you go up the road, and the school is at the top of the road there was houses on the right. Then the next road to the left was behind. It was not a paved road, it was just kind of a little road, and went up to Dixon's house, I believe it was, on the left. And the house, Dixon's house, was between, it's almost where the highway is right now, behind that garage that the city uses down there right now.
The Hicks building?
Yeah, the Hicks building, yeah. Then if you go to the next one, which is straight in line with the town hill, we call it, the steep hill there, it came right down to the highway that still exists down there. And that particular road went by the French church. It was a quaint little white church with a steeple. Both churches had steeples. They were just typical churches from back in that era. The Federated Church decided not to move their church, and the French church was going to move their church, and then ended up not moving their church, and both of them built new churches, so both of them got torn down. But below Town Hill, as you come down Town Hill before you head to the highway, The last building there on the left was, before you get to the highway, was the tall Grange Hall that was the barber shop. The basement was Grange, the top was Grange. The Boy Scouts, the Cub Scouts met in the top. And it had a pool hall in it. And then you turn right there, and I don't remember for sure. I remember there was Gearson's, and there was a drugstore on the right, and there was a little building that housed a restaurant, and then there was a vacant spot between there and the Hicks building. The restaurant, if you can still see that today. They took that whole building and moved it. It was concrete block, and down there by in the industrial area, there's a little concrete block building there. I'm trying to place, it's right beside the fish and game place. What's your state?
Really? It went clear down to an
Yeah, they took it down there. You know, I don't know how they moved that sucker, but that's where that building is, and it's
Okay.
still there today. And it's got a fence around the whole thing, or the back area of it, and different companies come in and like the line companies, power line companies that do contract work, they go rent that building. It's right there, just north of Pro Builders. It's a real low building. Anyway, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. You're describing the town.
Oh, I'm driving to town. Yeah. Across from that little restaurant was the Log Cabin Tavern. There was a building in between the Log Cabin Tavern and the Oddfellows Hall. The Oddfellows Hall was on the street that was going down on below the tracks, and there was a whole set of houses way down by the river down there, and the railroad tracks. You had to go across the railroad tracks, and I think the warehouses were to the left of that, and then below that was a road with houses on it. The Willie Risk grocery store was across the street from the Lodge Hall, and that was always there. He was a wonderful contributor to the town, and always great. But it was a good little grocery store. And I think the little restaurant started out to be a grocery store at one point in time, the one that got moved down south. And then it became a little cafe, if I remember right. But beside Risk's store was the library, and that was a nice building. They had a nice little library there. And then Alan Warby had a hardware store. I can remember the hardware store because he always had this potbelly stove in the middle of the building there to keep it warm, the hardware store. And I was just a little tyke, and I always liked to go in there, and Mom and Dad bought me a brand new coat, and I kind of backed up against that potbelly stove, and it melted every bit of my new coat. And I remember my mom and dad were not happy about that. And then you went on past that, and if I remember right, the next building is the garage. He had a couple little old 1900 race cars. Was it Dismore's Garage, I think? The flat place there in the lake is still there. Across from that was the park, which is still kind of there with the steps going down into the water. To the right of the park, if you're looking uphill, was a meat cutter's little place. We bought meat, and then to the right of that, there might have been one house, but the next, first or second house that opened onto another little street that kind of went up to the left there was Belle Cumble's house, and Mrs. Russell was a teacher, one of my teachers in school, and her husband, I don't remember for sure how it was related to Belle Cumble, but Babe Russell, who was an icon for the Crum Canyon area, I think that was his relation. But if you start back up the street from the park, there was another little building there. I don't remember what it was, I think. So, if you went right straight on through town, the main road turned to the right just a little bit and then went on by. The first house on the right, and the street went down with all these beautiful trees that covered the whole street. I mean, it was just all trees
Do you
down there.
remember what kind they were?
They were huge.
Huge.
Huge trees, and I don't remember at all what kind they were. But the first house on the right was Warby's house, and there was lots of lots of people that there was lots of movers in town, and they wanted to move that house, and they all made bids on it because it was rock house. It was all rocks, period, and round river rocks, and they all said they could do it. And nobody would ever let them do it. And as far as I don't know whether it ever got pushed over. It probably is pushed over, but it was there. Nobody would ever let them move it. We had a house that was, Dad and Mom owned a house that was down that row of trees about halfway on the left. And we hired a company to move that house up. And that house today is the one that Paula Brock lives in. On the corner, and so you turn right, that kind of dead end about a block or so, if I remember right. It was just there. So there was a bunch of houses moved. Dwight's houses was moved, and I remember that house because it was huge. It sets up on, it's owned by Greg and Margie Peterson now. It was setting across. As you left the school, it was the first house, well, it's where that little park is right now. And they had to bring it up the road, turn it, and go up where it is now. And it was the largest house in Entiat that got moved. And it would have got up there just absolutely fine, except in the middle of the whole thing, one of those huge timbers that they put underneath the houses to haul them broke and went up through the floor, you know. And so, otherwise, that house would have got up there with no trouble whatsoever. Dixon's house, I think it was, became the house over there by the Friends Church on the hill in the parsonage. And anyway, what else?
Well, you described the old town. How about some of the people from that era? Is there anybody you'd like to, names that we've had, of course, was Albert Jones, Abby Dabby, John Brown.
You know, I never met John Brown. Everybody else has in the world, but I never met him. I just hear stories about him.
How about Buzz Butts?
Buzz Butts, he had the house up on the hill up there. I was trying to think who presently owns it. You know who owns it, I think. No, you don't.
I don't.
Well, Buzz Butts, they built a new house when Entiat moved. I'm not sure where he lived before that, but it's the house that who's the son-in-law? Dang, it's a common name. She started the bakery here in Entiat.
Lori Anderson?
Lori, no.
Sorensen?
Sorensen. I think Lori Sorensen owns that house today.
Okay.
You know.
I know where she lives.
Yeah, that's the house that Buzz Butts built, I believe.
Good location.
That was a new house.
Do you have any idea why Albert Jones was called Abby Dabby?
No, not for sure. there was a...
I think some kids named it.
Yeah.
Because he's always yapping at them.
Yeah.
That's what they call it, I think.
There's, where Leroy Sorensen lives today, it's a nice big block house up there. That was always Mrs. Noon's house. She lived there for years. I think her husband died, and then her daughter, Carol Noon, lives in Seattle, I think, someplace now. That's how, and that house was there. It wasn't moved up there.
What part of Entiat's past that no longer exists do you miss the most? I mean, it could be a place, a person, a feeling.
You know, I think the thing that bothers me the most is we're missing the continuity of the community compared to what we have today. Now it's become a bedroom city to Wenatchee. Lots of people moving in, lots of people moving out. And back then there was always the same people in the valley. They were all very stable, wonderful people. They were all pretty well off and stable. The school was always supported, and the churches were supported, the Lodge and the Grange, all of these different organizations. It was quite the community. The logging community was really great then also. We had Zweiss in here logging, and Harris's, and the Harris's Mill. Wonderful people, absolutely wonderful people. And Martin Peterson, one of the people that we should interview probably is Connor Peterson's brother, Bob Peterson, who lives up in Manson, along the water up there, and farms out there north of Chelan. But there's lots of stories about Martin Peterson as a logger. And one of the stories that I remember was that there's a big ditch that comes all along the mountain there and down to the Keystone Orchard, which is across the Green Bridge, about a mile up. Martin Peterson always had a cat and was a logger, but they contracted him. If you go down there yet today and look at it, there's a rock bluff. I didn't think about that.
All right. Well, we have just a few more questions, so go ahead.
Anyway, he was down there working and trying to go around that rock bluff. And the way I understand it was that the cat rolled off the hill all the way down into the river and ended up with puddles of blood. Well, he picked himself up and went home, which was up where Connor Peterson lives right now. And his wife came up the river and didn't see the cat up there, and so she went down there to see where he was and found nothing but blood all over the place in the river. And, hey, Yuki, would you go down and ask him to quit? Hey, Ken! Anyway, let's just wait a minute, because that's probably picking it up, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, Margaret didn't find anything, so went home, and here's Martin with his head smashed, literally smashed. And so she bundled him up, took him down to Wenatchee to the hospital, and they looked him over and they said, "There's no way, we can't help this guy, he's done, he's gonna die." So they pushed him on a stretcher over to the side of the hospital room there, and just kind of waiting for him to die. And she said, "Well, how can I help him? What do I do?" And then bear in mind, this is back in the maybe early 50s, okay, where there's not good roads to Seattle. They said, if you get him to Seattle, there's probably a doctor or something over there that would help him, And so she's, okay. She loaded him up in the car and hauled him all the way to Seattle, to the hospital, they told her. And near as I know, that's where he got put back together, and he ended up with a big steel plate in his head. And that put him back together enough to where he died with that plate in his head a long, long time later, so.
Yeah, one time, in Entiat, you had the orchards, and you had the logging, and you had the mills. There was a base, there was money in the community, there was a living.
Mhm.
And now, about the only thing you have left is the orchards.
Mhm.
And there's only half of those.
Yeah, one of the things I'd like to bring up is the fact that there used to be mining in there. If you went up Crum Canyon to the Sunshine Mines, or Sunshine Canyon, and there's a whole bunch of mines in the Sunshine Canyon. But if you go up behind my place, it splits into Maple Canyon and Sanders Canyon on the right. At the top of Sanders Canyon, there's a huge bowl that's probably about 2 miles roughly from my house. And they put a stamp mill in up there, right down in the bottom of that bowl, and ran that for years. The power line that ran to it went up through our place, and I still have some of the power line that was on the poles down in a big old roll that we rolled up. One of the mines is they've blown it in so you can't get in it anymore. And there's another one up there too that I don't know whether they know where it is or not. But mining was big. I remember there was an old guy, and you'd have to ask Dixie Hinton who it was, because I think he lived over there at her place, but worked one of those claims, and I can remember him walking up through our backyard and on up the canyon up there every day, going 2 miles way up there someplace and digging gold. And I think he lived at Dixie Hinton's place over there. So
John Siegel said that he had a stamp machine he was going to give to the museum. Now, what was the function of the stamp? I mean, not being in the mining industry,
Okay.
I've heard about them, but I have no idea what a stamp machine.
they smash rocks looking for gold,
All right.
basically.
Okay.
And there is an old building up Crum Canyon to the right there. There's a building we have standing there today that was a stamp mill.
Okay. That kind of explains that.
Yeah, well, it's amazing some of the things that went on back then that we had no idea about. People were tough back then.
Yes, they were.
We do everything with a car now and chainsaws, and they didn't have that stuff back then when they made. And they did wonderful carpentry, and the buildings in Entiat were great. The houses were good, and lots of things like that. One of the things I remember about that era was making boxes. We made apple boxes till the cows came home every year. We had a stand that, we put the ends in, and the bottoms were different than the sides, and you made apple boxes, and that's what you picked in rather than in bins. The first bins that came to town were in 1959, because Dad had to change at that point and use bins. And he went down and he needed a new crawler, because we always used a crawler on our orchard to pull the sprayer, because we had some steep places. And so he went down and bought a new crawler that had forks on the front of it, and he unloaded 1 load of bins and tore the ground up so bad by the time he got the 1 load of bins unloaded that he went back down and bought a brand new Ford wheel tractor. That's what we had for years. It was I don't remember, 3000 Ford red and gray tractor. And what else?
Well, you just answered that one, because I had how have tools, equipment, and vehicles changed during your lifetime, and kind of addressed that.
Well, to a little bit, I think I'd like to address it just a little bit more.
Okay.
Because we have what's called puddle hops. They were cut down cars that people ran around in the orchard with, and we had 1930 Chevrolet, I still have it, truck that had no cab on it that we used for most everything in the orchard. And Dad used to have some peaches planted in the orchard, and this was before my time. I don't know when it was. I mean, it was probably in the 40s. But he would take that old Chevrolet truck with no cab on it and a load of peaches, drive it all the way to Spokane, and peddle all those peaches and come back. So life was completely different then. And when he got sick and tired of trying to keep an old truck like that running in the orchard, he decided, I'm not gonna put up with this anymore, I'm not gonna cut some old truck down and make it work. He went down to Wenatchee and went to Ford and said, I want a brand new truck, and I don't want any cap on it. And they would not talk to him. They said, you'll just bring it back down a year from now, want us to put a cap on it. He said, no, I want it with no cap. And Cheryl wouldn't talk to him, and he finally went to Studebaker. And Studebaker said, yeah, okay. And they looked around and found a bus nose and sold us the bus nose truck. Then we drove that up until Benz came in 1959, back and forth. They put a little windshield on it because it got kind of cold, and just had a seat sitting there. And we used it in the orchard. I can remember lifting up the limbs one time to get it through the orchard. I'm standing there like this, and Dad ran over both of my feet. And it kind of hurt, but I got over it. I just kind of pushed him down into the ground. So, but they did things different back then. You know,
Yeah.
they made do with what they had. We still have that old truck up there hanging too. Kind of reluctant to get rid of some of the sentimental stuff, but I know I should.
Okay, my last question is, what do you appreciate about the Entiat Valley? The whole area?
Then and now.
Oh, I think it's the greatest place in the world to live, you know. Where else can you have 3 hours to Spokane, Seattle, Canada, 4 or 5 hours to Portland? You have all the benefits of everything you can think of. You know, we're within just a little ways away from swimming in the lake or fishing in the lake or water skiing. You know, we could drive to Lake Chelan if we wanted to. We can go up to the campgrounds and fish or camp or whatever we want to go up the Entiat. And it's really got everything here. It's almost better than Lake Chelan, you know, because you can go out of your backyard if you live up the Entiat and maybe snowmobile all the way to Leavenworth or Chelan, Lake Chelan if you want to, and ride your motorcycle any place up in the hills. As long as you got a license, you can get any place. You can go out up in the orchard and shoot, you know, nobody's going to bother you. You don't have that in Chelan, you don't have that in a lot of places. Entiat's got all of those things, and so that, you know, the school is good, and we got good organizations, and it's a nice place to live. I like it.
Do you guys have any
Is there
questions?
anything else you want to add?
You wanna-
Well, you know,
wanna ask?
I firmly believe that
You sure can.
what happens today will be history tomorrow. And there's some things that have happened in between the old timers and us new timers that are around here. One of the things I'd like to talk a little bit about is the fire department.
Okay.
I think there's some things that should be remembered. Back in the early 70s, late 60s, the city of Entiat bought a new fire truck, and I think we still have it around yet today. But there was no fire department outside the city limits, and it became an insurance problem and problems for the city of Entiat to respond to fires or somebody else outside the city limits. And so 3 guys got together. They were well known. I don't remember for sure who all they were right at this present time, but formed the Fire District 8 that we have today. And they formed it the year before the public disclosure system came in, to where they had to disclose all their finances. And every last one of them said, absolutely not. I'm not going to tell anybody what my finances are. I'm done. They all quit. Okay, so there was no fire commissioners, no fire department, no fire truck, no anything. And I remember my aunt came up to me and said, how'd you like to be a fire commissioner? That was Alice Warren's wife. And I said, I don't know what a fire commissioner is or does or anything else, but I'll think about it. So I thought about it a while and said, okay, and I went down to the courthouse and got sworn in as a fire commissioner. And after I was in, I was kind of wondering, how do you make a fire department? What should we do here? You know, because we have nothing, we have not even any other commissioners, you needed 3 commissioners. And a couple months into it, I got a call from Chelan County 1 down there in Wenatchee. They said, we have a fire truck down here that you guys bought, and we want it out of our station. I said, what is it? It said it's a 1949 Chevrolet pumper from King County. And I thought, holy cow, you know, they never had a meeting, they didn't have any minutes, it just got purchased on the phone, you know. So I went down and got this thing, and we paid the bill for it. So when I brought it home, I took it down by the river down there where I had a hole for the pump that I pumped to the orchard with, and I invited all my friends to come down and see the new fire truck. Well, everybody that came down to see the new fire truck, I signed them up as a fireman. And so that was the start of the fire department. We had no coach, we had no place to put that truck, we had no money. I mean, we got like $1,500, I think it was, a year to maintain that truck. And I don't remember what the truck cost us, but it wasn't very much. And so we got a hold of Verge Mirren from Chelan County 1, and we had fire meetings regularly, and he was the fire chief of Chelan County 1. He came up and every month would teach us how to be firemen. And then Glenn Harris from the city of Wenatchee took a liking to us. Both of them came up, and they just gave us a wealth of knowledge and taught us how to be firemen. And I remember we found a couple more commissioners, and we didn't have any way of keeping that thing warm. We put stock heaters in it, it froze up, it broke. We pumped gas out of Jim Small's gas tank over there, and I remember the state auditor came after us and said, you can't do that, you know, you have to go buy your gas. I said, this is a bunch of volunteers, and we don't have any place to put it, we don't have the money to drive it down to Entiat or time, you know, so we're going to do it anyway, take your finding off. And the guy thought about it, and I said, if you don't like it, I said, come over here and be a volunteer yourself, you know, see what it's really like, because we got it stashed in somebody's garage, and they're keeping it warm and trying to, and he said, okay, I'll take the finding off, and that was the end of that. But we still went for a long time, up until about 1978. At that point, we had passed a bond issue for $70,000. That was the maximum that we could indebt the district to, was $70,000. And we had saved up some money by then. We had saved up about $60,000. We got money any place we could. We got old coats from everybody that threw out coats. We got air packs from, I don't remember whether they had any air packs back then. I don't remember. But we, you know, I was always looking and scrounging for things that we could get for free. And that's all we existed on. And we had saved up $60,000 because we needed a fire station. Well, they had this drop money that was out there, and the money was available, but there was no provision to get a grant. There was no way you could get the money. And so they suggested I write a grant and ask for the money. And so I asked for $80,000, and I think we had saved, wait a minute, this is what happened. We had not saved that much money, but we passed the bond issue for $70,000. I asked for a grant of $80,450 or something like that. And we had to match that money, and we had to have it done within 90 days, or it was a really short amount of time that we had to spend the money and replenish the $80,000, you know, and match the $80,000. So we went out and we bought two 1977 really heavy-duty Dodge trucks with four-wheel drive, and we basically built those up as fire trucks. We went to Spokane and got boxes for them. We went down and got a slip-in unit out of Oregon. We put lights on it and made a fire truck out of it. It was completely unique compared to everybody else doing fire trucks at that point. We bought two of those. We built the fire station there in the mouth, 2.5 miles up the Council Head. We also built the fire station up in Ardenbohr. And we also got the Kenworth fire truck that we built from scratch. And it was kind of interesting. Jim Small and I sat in his office for about 2.5 days because we didn't want just any fire truck. We wanted one that really set what we wanted, you know. We were interested in making it different. So we'd go back and forth for 2.5 days, off and on, saying, well, how about if we do this? No, I can't do that because of this. And all of a sudden we'd come up with an idea and we'd write it down. Well, we wrote all these ideas down and got a hold of Western States Fire Apparatus in Cornelius, Oregon. And they said, yeah, we'll build it, but we can't get any trucks. We can't get any Ford trucks because there were 9 months before back ordered. It was a problem back then at that time. So they looked around and found a Kenworth cement mixer that had been left on Kenworth's lot over there in Seattle. Somebody had taken it, and it was the only truck available. It cost us $10,000 more than a Ford would have cost us. So we said, let's get it. They took it down to Cornelius, Oregon, and they kept calling us up saying, we've never built a truck like this before. How on earth do you want this? And we talked to them until we got what we wanted. And I said, I don't care what you do, but you got to have it here by a certain day. Well, they called us about 10 days or a week before, and they said, we got this truck done, and we've never built one like it before. And we have 3 trucks sold just like it, except on Fords. And we'd like to demo it on the way up there. I said, I don't care what you do with it, just as long as it arrives in my driveway by this date, because we had to have it there to match the grant money. And when it arrived, they had sold 6, I think, just like it, and had 2 or 3 more that were interested in ones just like it. So you might see some trucks around that look just like our truck, only they're all on Fords because they're $10,000 less. Anyway, there was $80,000, $80,400 some dollars or something that truck cost us. And those 2 fire stations and 2 other trucks were all bought with that same $150,000 that we had. I don't know how we did it, but we matched the $80,000 with the $70,000. I don't know if we matched it twice or what went on. But we did pull that off, and that was kind of the start of the fire department. Since then, they've been very successful, and they're doing great. One of the things I think that we ought to look into is the Dinkelman fire and the Tyee fire, because there's a lot of stories around those. I saved 28 pages or 22 pages or something like that of the Dinkelman fire, of letters from people in the valley about what happened between them and the DNR. You'd laugh until you cry and think, oh my gosh, how did all of this happen in one place at one time? And that was the same time that Shorty Wilson, Louita Wilson, lost her place up Mills Canyon. And we tried to save that. And it turned out that we found out that basically the DNR, which was left in charge of it, pretty much burned it down. And I made a baby book about it, and we asked for $70,000. I took her physically to Olympia, and we met with the risk management person for the state of Washington. And I explained what happened, and I took her through the baby book, that all the pictures and fire patterns and stuff that had happened, and I showed them what happened. And I said, you know, you owe her $70,000 for her house. You know, it's you burned it down. And I figured, well, we'll hear from the lawyer. There'll be a big stink for a couple of years or 3 years. They won't pay, and they're not going to have anything go on. And I said, have you heard, after I was done talking, I said, have you heard about what went on in Entiat? And she says, we've heard of it. It's terrible. She says, I don't know. We're scared to death. That's what she said. And so I said, well, here's 28 pages of people's letters about what went on their place with the DNR, you know, the Department of Natural Resources. And she said, well, thank you. Well, lo and behold, about, I don't know, it was like a couple of months. We heard nothing. She gets a check in the mail for $70,000, you know. So they realized that they were upside down on that, and you know, something good happened from it, and she got some money for it. But things like that that have happened in the valley, we need to record, because it's going to be history. 50 years from now, it's going to be, well, what happened back then? You know, where did that fire come from? And that was one of the things I was thinking about. Can't read my own writing.
I know I'm sure impressed with the fire department.
I think it's good.
One of the things, when we moved over here, I got a hold of the insurance company and they said, are you covered? And I said, yes, we're covered by the Entiat City Fire Department. Oh, well, that's good. That's good. They've got a high rating. I said, okay. And living out where I live, normally that's you know, your insurance rate goes up depending on your coverage. Our insurance rate didn't go up.
Yeah.
Because we're under the umbrella.
So we thank the Entiat Fire Department.
Yeah, we did, long before we ever moved here, we thanked them.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things I was thinking about was the old school of Entiat, and before they tore it down and built the new school. When I was in the 8th grade, 7th grade it wasn't like this, but in the 8th grade I think that must have been the culmination of building the dam. I think that was probably the biggest 8th grade class in the whole history of the school, because there was 50 kids in that class. We had two teachers inside the classroom. It was a huge classroom. And most of them, a lot of them were dam workers' kids, you know, that had landed there. And, you know, watching that dam get full or fill up, and seeing the new road built around, and losing some of the people that were down in the old Entiat down there. Another person that might, it was south of Entiat, but they went to the Entiat school, was Van Winkle's. I don't know whether you've ever heard of Van Winkle's or not, at Wagnersburg, I think it was called. Jerry just died, but Virgil's still alive, and Donnie's still alive. Donnie's younger, but Virgil might remember, and Cheryl might remember something about that area down there. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. Put some on the back of this
Do
page.
you girls have any questions?
I think so.
No?
Oh, one of the things that, could I talk about the community church just for a hair?
Okay.
The community church was formed in 1978, originally rented from the Lodge Hall over there, which is the same as the restaurant building right between City Hall and the Forest Service. That was the Lodge Hall that was brought up from the old town of Entiat. Had a basement in it. And we rented it the whole time except for maybe a couple of months from 1978 on till we bought it, and we were there until we came over to this old Berkey warehouse, they call it. The thing that kind of happened that was kind of interesting was the lodge members became older and older and older and older, even though they're really active back in the 50s. Each one of them were 80, and that was kind of different, you know. So they finally decided they were going to sell it, and they wanted to sell it to us. They didn't want to, I don't remember the number for sure. I'm thinking it might have been 60,000 or something like that. They wanted, and the Forest Service would give them 85,000 in a minute because they wanted the land and the building. And they said, no, we want to sell it to the church. And so they got together and thought it over. We really didn't ever know for sure whether they would even sell it to us or not, you know, because it was interesting. When they decided that they were going to sell it to us for 60,000 instead of 85,000, and they were not going to charge any interest, and they'd carry the contract. Well, when they set that through to their Grand Lodge, which they were the ones that had to allow them to sell it. They couldn't sell it without permission, you know. They said, that's no way. You cannot sell that building without letting them pay interest. So these guys went back and they sat down and they thought about it and thought about it. And so here's what they said: we'll charge you interest, all right? We will charge you 5% of every payment that you make. And that's it. And that's the way we paid off the lodge. And so if you made a $300 payment, $15 was interest, and that was the end of it. And there was no interest on the principal or anything. When we finally finished paying it, the bank says, that's not possible. They got to looking at the contract, and sure, that was what it was, you know. So they charged their interest, and they got their way. So that was kind of fun. And, you know, it's been a real blessing to see what God has done with this church, you know, because it's huge.
Yeah.
We got this church kind of the same way. Maybe I should tell you that. But we went to John McQuaig and asked him. We were looking for a place to expand because we didn't have enough room where we were. And John McQuaig has a big office building down at the bottom of 5th Street in Wenatchee. We're sitting in his boardroom there, Leroy Hoschnegger and myself, and we thought, well, we might as well just get this out of the way quick, you know. So John McQuaig came walking in, and I said, just a second, John. He was just a couple steps in, and he stopped and looked at us, and I said, we want to buy this old warehouse up here with 2.83 acres and 20,000 square feet. We want to make a church out of it. If the price is too much, we can't afford it, we'll just leave, not waste your time and not waste our time. And he stopped, he looked at us, and he said, a church? I said, a church. He's still standing there, and he says, $150,000, and I'll make it work for you. We were not there 15 minutes, and he said, I'll carry the contract, I'll give you no interest, interest only for the first 2 years. And you know, you can't even buy a house for $150,000. You know, so God has really been good to this place and really opened the doors. So that's how this came about out here, the old Berkey warehouse. Oh, and something else I want to tell you about the Berkey warehouse. I've talked to some of the Berkey kids. I think there's Ed Berkey and Bill Berkey. I can't remember which. I think it was Bill that I talked to. One of them was an airplane mechanic in Moses Lake. But their dad, their grandpa really built this warehouse over a period of time. And the sanctuary that we have there today, the west end of this building, my understanding is that it was the first try at a controlled atmosphere warehouse there was. And the walls are 1 foot thick, and there's 3 dead air spaces in the walls. And the only reason it did not work as a controlled atmosphere was because they couldn't seal up the leaks. There were just too many places for it to leak. That's why they went to concrete tip-up walls and stuff. But that was, I think, back in the 50s when they actually built that building. So that was kind of an interesting sidelight. And you could tell on the floor where it had different buildings than not before, but that one, they kind of glued the ground, built the building, and it failed. So right today, it still has no insulation. It's not that hard to heat. We haven't had a terrible heat bill, you know, but
It's been fun watching it.
Yeah,
so that's all I can think of right now. So.
okay, thank you very,
Thanks
very
a lot.
much.
Yeah. Good morning, welcome.